All right. Well, welcome everybody that's joining us and will join us later. We're glad to be with you this morning. We have Dave Runyon with us, who is a co-author of The Art of Neighboring. Dave, how are you? How are things outside of Denver these days?
Just hanging out like most of the nation, getting a lot of quality family time in these days.
That's good. That's more than we probably have ever had in a while. So
that's right. That's exactly right.
Well, let's jump right in, Dave. I first encountered the book with a denominational partner that was helping churches in the Austin area just recapture this idea of embracing their neighborhoods and doing the work of connection. I picked it up for my D-Man studies, and it's made an impact both just really personally in my neighborhood and just in ministry. Maybe you can give us just the overview, the tenets of the book and where it's got its genesis.
Yeah, well, it's ironic that you came across it in D-Man school, because I think our book is like the dummies version of what it means to be missional or to take the Great Commandment seriously. So it's about as kindergarten, as low bar as you can get. And I think that's what's made it potent and made it work with other leaders. But I was a pastor here in the Denver metro area for 10 years, worked at two great churches, and I just was starting to bring faith leaders together and to dream about the city and to dream about how we could work together and function like we're on the same team. And as we were doing that, we were bringing in local government leaders, and we had our mayor look at us as we were trying to brainstorm, what's the one issue we're going to go after. And he just said in passing, he said, if you guys want to have the biggest impact on our city, you should start a neighboring movement, because neighboring trumps all these government programs that we're trying to create. And it's the smartest thing you can do. And so that just sent me that sent my life on a different trajectory, because I wasn't really engaged in my own neighborhood at that time. I was just busy doing church. So that's a little bit of the story. I mean, my friend and I, Jay, ended up writing a book, and the whole premise of the book is that if you're going to be a Christian, it'd probably be a good idea for you to know your neighbors' first names. So, and hey, Matt, you might want to throw it on mute there real quick, because I think we can hear the typing. There we go. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I got a bunch of weird noise issues, by the way, in case you can't tell.
Oh no, that's great. And so, yeah, the idea of what if your neighbor, what if Jesus was talking about loving your neighbor as your actual neighbor, was just a great place to jump off from. But this isn't a church program. This isn't something, just one more thing for us to do. What does this look like? How does this transform the way we do life?
Yeah. Well, a lot of churches do just use it as a program. They just do a great sermon series, and I'll check back in with them a year later and go, hey, how's the neighboring stuff going? They'll be like, oh yeah, that was a great sermon series. And so I think ideally it is a value. It's something that becomes part of the DNA of a church. And it's really hard to do that in our culture, especially for church leaders, where everybody's coming in saying, I need the new thing, give me something fresh, take me deeper, all that kind of stuff. It takes a lot of courage to say the same simple thing over and over again, to look at people and go, hey, what you do in your front yard counts. That's real ministry. Hey, if you're going to be part of our church, we want you to be one of the best neighbors on your block. Hey, we love all the other stuff you're doing with people on your kids' soccer teams and at the coffee shop and the people at work. But in all that, by the way, is loving your neighbor. I think that's really, really important for us to always validate clearly in Jesus's economy. That is loving your neighbor. And so I think that that's really important for us to communicate to everyone. But we also need to say all of that doesn't sprinkle magic fairy dust over your neighborhood, and all of a sudden Jesus wasn't talking about those people. And so, we just learned to just start very, very simple. When we started doing this, we had about 20 churches. We did a joint sermon series in our city. This was all the way back in 2010. And when we first started doing this, we kind of fell into a lot of things backwards that ended up being providential. But one of them was, we didn't ask people to go love their neighbor. We just said, hey, would you be willing to learn and retain and use your neighbor's names? And so we started right there. We weren't going for this big goal. We were starting with a really small first step Now, it was a Trojan horse to get him to do all kinds of other stuff, because once you get a little bit of momentum going, once you break that awkward ice between the person that you've seen for 2 years and you don't know their name, and once you start using their name when you see them, with some of your neighbors, it sets you down this pathway. One of my friends says it's like stepping on a moving sidewalk, and you just can't stop it. But if I could go back and do it again, I would do it the exact same way. I would just ask people to do something really small at the start that might set them on a trajectory to something else.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. You kind of mentioned in the book this idea of three tenets that we all kind of live with that provide barriers. This idea of isolation, fear, and misunderstanding. And I just think in this moment right now that we're living in this crisis, if we lived in isolation, fear, and misunderstanding, how amplified is that in this current climate? How do we overcome those things? How do we start to embrace some of the unknown in these particular areas?
Yeah, well, I think that's hard to do when our world is functioning normally. And now we're here in this moment, and we're sitting here in the midst of the COVID crisis. And I think we do need to pivot how we're thinking about our interactions with others. And so I would just say this: what's happening right now, and I think we have a great opportunity. What's happening right now is people are more isolated than ever. The loneliness factor is off the charts. People just don't have any face-to-face interactions for the most part with people at work, with people at school, with people at church. And I'm looking around my neighborhood. I've never seen so many people out. I've never seen so many people walking, and they're not necessarily walking together, but people are just so antsy. And so people are visible right now, and they're open, they're thirsty for some kind of a human connection. And so it's a beautiful opportunity for us as the church to actually start taking some small steps in our neighborhood. And I think as we do that, though, it's crucial that we're incredibly careful and thoughtful of how we do that. The last thing that we would want to do is put others at risk or ourselves at risk. And so I just think we're having to do some creative things to neighbor from 6 feet away and to go the extra mile just to model what does it look like to be careful and to be cautious, depending, of course, on what city you live in, on what state you live in. The city I'm in, we're at stay-at-home orders through at least the middle of April, if not longer. And so that has all kinds of implications for how we neighbor and for people's anxiety levels in general. And so I want to encourage people, and there's some really simple best practices that I think people can do right now in this moment if they want to get involved in their neighborhood.
Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of them is just like, if you already know some of your neighbors, like just go and have a sit-in with them. Like we're just doing this thing in our neighborhood where we're just like grabbing our own lawn chair, grabbing our own drinks, going and sitting in a chair 10 feet away from each other and just hanging out for an hour. That sounds really simple. It has been life-giving for me. It's been incredible for me. And we're just doing that like almost on a daily basis. If you want to start before that, it's just simply like when you see somebody out, take a minute to go, hey, listen, I should know your name, or I don't think we've ever met before. Knowing their names and writing down their names is a really, really big deal. Having eyes to see what's going on with some of your at-risk neighbors, maybe some of your older neighbors, and to go, if you already have a contact information for them, I would suggest phone or email. If you don't, I think just being really careful to wipe down your hands, go and leave a note and just say, hey, listen, here's where I am. If you need anything, let them know on the note that you did, that you are really careful, washed your hands before, wiped it down, take away a lot of those fears. But just using this as a moment to reach out and to care for the people that live right around us, to serve them. And then I would just say one of the best things we can do is ask for help ourselves. Like if you need help, if you have something that's weighing on you, if you have a physical need that you need to have addressed, don't be afraid to ask. We as Christians, we do this strange thing where we think we have to be the ones that are always serving. And so we want to put on our little super Christian neighbor capes. And I'll speak from my own experience. And we want to go and like serve everybody. And if you always are putting on that type of like a mindset, the relationships that you have will be limited.
Yeah, that's a great thought there, to to know that we are in need as well. That is,
Yeah.
it's certainly my inclination as well, as to how can I fix this? And when it's a problem that can't be fixed, it's a tough thing to do mentally. What are some? Are you hearing success stories? Are you hearing some encouragement out there?
Yeah, I just feel like we're all seeing a lot of it. And there's some people that have been really strategic in our culture of saying what we need right now are some positive stories and highlighting some of the great things that are happening. And we're receiving stories from all over the place. In fact, I have that little COVID neighboring guide, COVID-19 neighboring toolkit. So if you guys can email Jack or Matt and they'll get it to you, or you guys can post it somewhere. But I thought about trying to include stories as part of that toolkit, and we just started to get overwhelmed. Like there's so much good stuff happening because of this crisis. And that's always true. I mean, we've known this about neighboring for a long time. We had a city leader once tell us, listen, in a crisis, your neighbors are always your first responders. Now, they weren't talking about a pandemic. They were actually talking about a crisis, Katrina, and a crisis like the floods that went on in Houston. And they were talking about the systems always get overwhelmed. And so your neighbors become your first responders. But I've been thinking about that quote a lot recently because I just go, wow, that is so true.
Yeah, that's profound. But what makes this specifically Christian? I do think we do see kind of that initial push of everybody, and I think, if we can remember back to 9/11, there's a similar kind of response across culture that we all kind of drew in together for a little bit, and I think we're seeing that now. But how do we make this specifically a lived out faith, and not just being a good person?
Yeah. Well, here's like an unpopular answer to that. What makes it Christian is the people that are actually doing it and the way that they've been living their lives for years. I mean, I would like to think that believers are already placed in neighborhoods and that there's something centered about them. And there's something different about the way they think about their things and the way that they think about their time and the way that they live sacrificially for others. Now, this is a very romanticized Pollyannish view, I realize. But if that were the case, if we as believers, if the people who were orienting their lives around the way that Jesus talks about living really were doing that, and they were taking the teachings of Jesus seriously, then everything we do would have a huge impact on everybody else. Then all you would have to do is make connections with people outside your own network, and the gospel would just rush forth. So I think one of the interesting questions to ask is this: as you start to engage with the people that live around you, do you appear to be somebody who's living in a countercultural way? And I think that's really what it is. And so we can do all kinds of programs, and we've been really hesitant to gear people up with tools and like these little schedules of how they're supposed to relate to their neighbors, because here's the reality. Like in our culture, when a Christian does something nice for a non-Christian, a lot of times the non-Christian starts waiting for when is the other shoe going to drop? Where's the bait and switch going to happen here? And I hate that that's true in our culture, but we just need to know there's been a lot of people who have done some in our tribe who have done some weird things to people who aren't Christians. And so we've learned this, that the best posture to ask people is this when they start to engage with their neighborhoods is, if you knew your neighbor was never going to take a step towards God, do you think Jesus' command to love your neighbors still stands? And everybody goes, yeah, of course it does. Well, the irony is when you enter into relationships with that kind of a posture, the opportunities for spiritual conversations come up all over the place. When you go in thinking like this is an evangelism move, or this is, people feel it. They can tell when you have some kind of an ulterior motive, or somebody has an ulterior motive, and it stunts the relationship. When you go in knowing this isn't some evangelism tool, this is a discipline, this is a way of living for me, there's something that is pure about that. And I've just found that people want to have spiritual conversations way more than I thought they did, as long as my motives are in a great place. So that we've shared that a lot in different places. I know that trips up some people, but I'm just telling you what I've experienced in my own life and in the life of the people that have been part of this for about 10 years out here in Denver.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's exactly where we would come from. Is there's something ethically that has to be incorporated here. It's not bait and switch. You're not doing this to count people as numbers, but
Right.
As neighbors. And I think that it is significant that things happen. Um, I've got stories and could tell, but don't want to bore people with those. But it's a good thought and a good reminder for us that living the disciplined life just makes impact and difference for lots of folks.
Can I say one more thing to that, Jack? Because I think one of the best apologetics we have in normal times, it should be this. Like, as Jesus people, we should be living at a pace that's different than most. We should be the type of people who, like, when we're engaged and present with people, we're dialed in with them. We should be the type of people who, like, when we're not running around with our hair on fire all the time. And that, I think, is one of the best apologetics in our culture right now, because what my experience is that most people are living in a way where they just go, this is so dumb. I know that there should be a better way than living like this, but I just think maybe everybody does it, or maybe it's just going to get better soon. And I think one of the best ways that we can show what it means to be a follower is to do what Jesus did. Like, he has these rhythms in his life where when he is, like, dialed in with people and engaged, he's just there and he's with them and he's going hard. And then he has other times where people are, like, bringing people in and saying, oh, you've got to be with this person, you got to be that person, and he'll just go, actually, no, I need to pull away. And it actually, when you read it in the text, it doesn't make sense. But he has such a strong belief in the value of that. Like, I call it, when you're working, work hard, and when you're not working, don't work. And so I think it's one of the best apologetics that we can have, that we have for the world as Christ followers. And now it's so fascinating. We're in this window where a lot of us have just been forced into having completely new rhythms. I think there's a lot of cool conversation space there to have with people that are in our tribe and the people that aren't.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I love the John Ortberg quote that you had there in the book about the hurry sickness, and that, what is it, like, love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Man, that's just life-giving, but challenging. Even in these moments, we're working from home, we're doing Zoom meetings, we need to fill in some time, but it is just a great reminder of, this is an opportunity to slow down, an opportunity to do something different with our time.
Jack, I remember when I first read that quote is from the book, The Life You've Always Wanted. And I remember it was a long time ago, but I remember reading that. It was one of the most convicting. It's one of those moments where it just jumps off the page at you. I remember just reading, love and hurry are not at all compatible. They're almost total opposites. And I remember reading it and going, oh no, that's true. And then I remember thinking, if everything is about love, loving God with everything you have, and loving others, how serious? Like, at that time, I wasn't taking hurry very seriously. And so just to let that sink in on me has been really, really important for my own life.
Yeah, that's good. It's the way we calendar, it says a lot about us. We've got a few questions I do want to get to. If that's all right, we'll shift to that.
Yeah, go ahead. Fire away.
And then try to conclude with an idea about Easter, because I do want to ask that question. But Mike Bryant asked, should this look different in a small town of 1,000 people rather than a city?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes. So the good news is this: I don't care who you are listening to this, or who your audience is, you have neighbors. Every single one of us has neighbors. I mean, it's a universal deal. That's why I think a lot of what we've done has been so easy for anyone to grab onto. Now, some people live in more rural environments and their neighbors look different. Their neighbors could be, an eighth of a mile away or more. And so then most of your interactions with neighbors are around boundary lines and fences. And sometimes there's been contention in some of those. And sometimes there's been a lot of goodwill built up in those. Some people live in apartments. those types of neighboring relationships look totally different. You'd think in apartments, you're closer together, you see each other more, it would be easier to connect. It's the opposite. People want to get into their caves and their refuge, and you have all kinds of crazy stuff around shared walls and issues with that come up. You also have great stuff with courtyards and pool areas and clubhouses that you can use around neighboring stuff in apartments. Single family homes, they have their own set of issues. And so like it always looks different. And in smaller towns that tend to be a little bit more rural, you have to work a little bit harder because the distance is bigger between the places that you live. The great thing about working with small towns, we worked with small towns a number of times, is that this stuff's done best when you have a group of churches doing it together. You're not just trying to run it through your own church. You're thinking about your city or your community. And you're maybe sucking in some of the government leaders and trying to talk with them too. And in small towns, it's just so much easier to bring the faith leaders together because they almost always have pre-existing relationship. And when you have pre-existing relationship between some of those faith leaders, it's shocking how much quicker you can move when it comes to this neighboring stuff. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Another one here. How do you move people past this idea of going and serving folks outside of their neighborhood to realizing that there is real need in this moment? You know, for those that maybe live in suburbia, that everything looks great and mowed grass and everybody's happy.
Yeah.
How do we move past that, the other, to my neighbor?
Yeah, and I would say you don't have to move people past it. I would just keep validating and encouraging the other things that they're doing. But I would start to help them understand and have a theology of place. That's something that's just thick. I mean, this is a bunch of like schooled up people on this call, this webinar, so you know this better than I do. But there's a thick theology of place running all through the Old and the New Testament. And it's something that in our culture we've lost for the most part because we've become so much more transient. And so helping people rediscover a theology of place is a really big deal. And the beauty of this is when you help people start to engage in proximity-based relationships, you're guaranteeing them that they won't be in some kind of a Christian bubble. Like, you know, it's really easy in our church culture to end up spending all of your time and having most of your deep friendships be with people who think about the world the same way that you do. When you do proximity-based relationships, it's the antidote to the Christian bubble. And it's incredible because, I mean, if you start to like think about just reach out to people who live right around you, you're guaranteeing that you're hanging out with people who think about God and the world differently than you do, unless you live in some like crazy Stepford place.
No, that's good. Just a couple more here. If you talked about having sit-ins or having just kind of a gathering there of your neighbors. Is it easier, as you're kicking this off, is it easier to set a time and ask people to come gather? Or do you want to build that up into a place where you're comfortable in sitting with one another and eventually get to that?
Yeah, I think that depends on kind of how you're, like my wife, they're doing these like over Zoom or they're actually using their iPhone FaceTime chats. By the way, if you have friends, if you have a small group, they have all iPhones, that tool is incredible. You got to try out this new like FaceTime, group FaceTime is amazing. But she just does a Zoom call and they just did like, hey, let's just all connect and they planned it out 2 days before. I more like just go look, I texted a group the other day and I just said, hey, I am dying. Can we go sit out in the cul-de-sac and just grab chairs and hang out? Like, I mean, and it was like, now, can we do it? And I'll see you there in 5 minutes. And so I think it's based on like how well you know some of those people and then your own personality type and how organized you are.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Lastly, and then I want to give you a chance to maybe give us just some of your resources and services and point us in some directions. But any creative ideas about how we do neighboring at 6 feet in Easter and Holy Week?
Oh man, this has been such a fascinating time for the church, and it's so hard when you take away the ability to gather in any kind of number. It's terrifying. I mean, it's like, and for a lot of pastors, just on a really pragmatic level, like the funding model runs on being able to gather every week. And so it's been neat to see a lot of the ways that people have pivoted towards that. But I know it's going to be different. I'm dreaming about the day when the churches in my community start gathering again. Like I can just already feel people's desire to gather, which is really exciting. The great thing that's happening right now I'm looking around my city and I'm watching, there's all these muscles that the church hasn't been exercising, that have almost been atrophied, and now they're exercising them. And I can just see God saying, hey, the tail was wagging the dog a little bit too much there. I mean, I had one of my friends at a large church was like, Dave, I cannot believe it's becoming really clear to me how much of my people's time, his staff members' time, was dedicated towards the weekend service. And he said, when I go back, I'm not doing it this way. And now he's taking them and he's saying, all right, I want to unleash you to just think relationally and to do that over Zoom, to do that whatever way. But he's now has this huge chunk of his staff's time that he's getting to reallocate towards other things. But I'm seeing churches that are thinking about spiritual disciplines, and like everyone's lives are all messed up anyway right now. It's a great time to introduce some spiritual disciplines. Thinking about how you're going to pour into kids, like through their parent, like equipping parents to actually like pour into their kids. Just the overall decentralization of the church. Like I know how much pain is out there around not being able to gather, and I get it. I understand it. I don't want to devalue that. But I think we're all starting to get really clear on some amazing things that are happening in the church, the Big C church, as a result of what's happening in our culture.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Point us to some resources. I know you've sent us, and we'll send out kind of the COVID-19 neighboring toolkit. Friends on the webcast here, if you want to email Julie Covington, she'll be able to get that resource out to you. What else can we share with our folks?
I'd encourage you to grab a few other pastors and go read something. Read something that Truett's been, working on, or that they've had an influence on. There's a book called The Leader's Journey. There's another book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. These are two amazing reads that are talking like, how do we as leaders deal and lead through times like this? I go do a book study with some other pastors around The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, who was another Baylor person. Robert Creech is the other one who had a lot to do with the leader's journey. So
he's at a Truett. He's our professor and did a webinar last week with us.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, go watch that webinar and then find some other faith leaders and watch it together. That's where I would start. And then if you want to check out some of the stuff we're doing, you can just go to artofneighboring.com. Right Now Media just released a 4-week small group thing where if you want some online content to give to your people and just say, hey, go through this study. They put it on the free part of their website, so it's available to everybody. And then, as we were talking about earlier, we have this COVID-19 neighboring toolkit, and it's not rocket science. It's just a bunch of simple ideas, some of which we just covered here. How do you do this in thoughtful and careful ways? And so you can get that at the artofneighboring.com website as well. So that's it. All that stuff I just mentioned, it's all free. Besides,
that's great.
Besides Rodney Stark's book, you just probably have to pay for that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Yeah, they're just tremendous resources, and that's great. With Right Now, I know the church where I'm interim pastor, they utilize that resource, and so being able to even just point them to those ideas will be a great ministry for the day and age that we're living in. It's incredible. Thank you for being here with us. We really appreciate it. It's been great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. It's been a lot of fun. Let me know if I can do anything else down the road.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you, Dave.
You betcha. All right.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.